Have you ever walked past a stranger on the street, caught their eye for just a fleeting second, and felt a tiny, unsettling tug in your heart? You know, that feeling that there's a whole universe of pain and struggle right there, hidden behind a thin facade of everyday life. I want to tell you about a moment like that. It happened in Providence, Rhode Island on a crisp, indifferent Tuesday. Not on a busy, glamorous street, but on a corner of Benefit Street, where the stately, historic homes sit just blocks away from the quiet desperation of the city's underbelly. And on this corner, something truly heartbreaking was unfolding. A secret plea whispered not to the wind, but straight into the soul of anyone who dared to look. Her name was Maya. She wasn't an aggressive panhandler. She wasn't loud or demanding. Maya was the picture of quiet, almost unbearable dignity. Picture a woman no older than 25, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, framed by dark, tired hair she kept neatly braided. But the real focus, the thing that drew every eye and broke every heart, was the bundle nestled against her chest. A baby, maybe 6 or 7 months old, swaddled in a clean but worn blanket. Maya's greatest struggle wasn't just the cold or the hunger. It was the unbearable weight of her silence. She carried a small cardboard sign that said simply, "Please, hungry baby, anything helps." Her eyes, a startling deep hazel, were fixed on the stream of people rushing past. They held a profound, heartbreaking mix of shame, fear, and a desperate burning love for the tiny life she was protecting. She wasn't begging for herself, she was begging for him, for Leo. Leo was her light, her reason for breathing, and the cruel, constant reminder of her failure. Every soft whimper he made was a physical punch to her gut. "How did I let us get here?" This was her constant, silent refrain. Maya had dreamed of giving Leo a life of sunshine, a little house with a green lawn, not this concrete cage of cold and empty bellies. Her biggest fear? Not the police, not the cold. Her biggest fear was the moment Leo's whimper would turn into a full, gut-wrenching cry that she couldn't silence with anything but empty promises. Maya hadn't always been here. Just 3 months ago, she was working 2 shifts at a diner in Pawtucket, saving every spare dollar for a security deposit on a small apartment. She was exhausted, yes, but she was safe. Then came the flu, a brutal week-long fever that turned into a nasty chest infection. No sick days, no savings, and suddenly no job. The minimum wage check stopped. The rent became a predator. The last few weeks had been a blur of cheap motels, then sleeping in a friend's broken-down car, and finally this, the cold, unforgiving sidewalk. Today was the worst day yet. Leo's formula, the last can she'd splurged on, was gone. All she had left was a crumpled $10 bill and a choice: buy a cheap, stale sandwich for herself to keep her strength up for one more day, or buy a gallon of milk she could water down to trick Leo's small stomach. But even that was an illusion. The real problem was the gnawing emptiness in Leo's blanket. For the past 2 hours, the baby had been uncharacteristically quiet, a terrifying stillness that meant he was past the point of crying, too weak to protest. His skin was pale, his lips slightly blue. Maya knew this wasn't just hunger anymore. This was a crisis. This was the precipice. As the afternoon rush hour began, Maya saw a man who seemed to embody the life she had lost. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase, his face set in a look of profound, almost aggressive annoyance. He was a wealthy architect, clearly on his way to a meeting in one of the grand colonial buildings nearby. He stopped, but not to offer help. He stopped because Maya's small silhouette was in his way. He looked at her, then at the sign, then back at her face with a look that wasn't pity, but a cold, burning impatience. He saw the shame in her eyes and seemed to interpret it as guilt. He didn't say a word, but the message in his glare was clear. "You're a nuisance. Get a job. You're ruining my city." As he brushed past her, his expensive watch, a heavy gold timepiece that seemed to mock her destitution, caught the light. The brilliance of that gold, the sheer, indifferent wealth it represented, made something snap inside Maya. It wasn't the rejection that hurt, it was the contempt. Just as she was about to sink into despair, a small, sudden sound cut through the noise of the traffic. It wasn't a whimper. It was a gasp. Leo, the small, quiet bundle, suddenly arched his back and let out a sound that was less a cry and more a raw, choking syllable. Maya's world narrowed to that sound. She tore open the blanket just enough to see his tiny face. His eyes were wide and unfocused, searching for a source of comfort that wasn't there. He wasn't just hungry. He was fading. Maya looked down at the $10 bill crumpled in her palm. A bottle of emergency Pedialyte and an instant can of formula would cost $18. She was $8 short, and the closest store was 3 long, cold blocks away, a distance she wasn't sure she could carry a fading child. She lifted her desperate gaze from Leo to the street, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw the wealthy man, the one with the gold watch, fumbling for his wallet to buy a newspaper from the street vendor 20 feet away. And then she saw it, the briefcase. He had placed it carelessly on the ground, leaning against a planter while he fished for change. It was a heavy, beautiful piece of leather, surely worth thousands. For one agonizing second, 2 worlds collided in Maya's mind. The wrongness of taking something that didn't belong to her, and the primal, screaming rightness of saving her son. Her hand, trembling, instinctively reached out, not toward the man but toward the briefcase. The desperate, animalistic urge to find anything inside that could be turned into $8, was overwhelming. She froze, her fingers hovering just inches from the soft, expensive leather. What would I do? What if he sees? But what if I don't? Just as she was about to make the impossible choice, a different man, a construction worker in a bright orange vest, smelling of sweat and sawdust, stepped up to her, blocking her view of the briefcase. "Hey, ma'am," he mumbled, his face kind but tired. "Saw the baby. Hold on." He rummaged in his own pocket, pulling out a crumpled, greasy paper bag. "It ain't much, but it's what I got. A little bit of extra cash." Maya looked at the offering. Her eyes went from the briefcase to the money in his hand, to the dying whimper coming from her son. The bag in the worker's hand was thick with cash, far more than $18. But as she reached for it, Leo gave a final rattling cough, and his small warm body went frighteningly limp against her. Maya's desperate cry was swallowed by the roar of a passing bus. The world went silent. When Leo's body went limp, the construction worker's kind face dissolved into a blur of panic. He didn't wait for Maya to react. He acted. "Call 911. The baby isn't breathing," he roared, his voice cutting through the rush hour noise like a knife. He snatched the lifeless baby from Maya's arms, his rough hands surprisingly gentle, and began immediate improvised CPR right there on the sidewalk of Benefit Street. The man in the gold watch, the architect, stood frozen, the newspaper slipping from his numb fingers. Passers-by went from indifferent to horrified, their phones suddenly flashing in the twilight. The siren came fast, wailing its way up the hill from the city center, a sound of terrifying hope. In a matter of frantic minutes, Leo was on a stretcher, a tiny, pale figure surrounded by the bright orange of the worker's vest and the blue uniforms of the EMTs. Maya, in a state of shock, could only follow. But just as the ambulance doors slammed shut, the construction worker, whose name she didn't even know, grabbed her arm. "They'll take him to Rhode Island Hospital," he said, his eyes drilling into hers. "You can't go to the hospital right now, not dressed like this, not with no ID. You'll be detained. You need to come with me. Trust me." He was telling the awful, brutal truth. She knew it. The police would want to know why a baby was near starving. She'd be lucky if they let her see him before a social worker took custody. With the agony of the past 2 hours still fresh, she made the impossible decision. She trusted this stranger. "My name is Ricardo," he said, guiding her away from the flashing lights. "I'm taking you to a place called Crossroads. It's safe. We get you warm, we get you food, and then we go find Leo." Ricardo took her to an emergency shelter in a less gentrified part of Providence, a place smelling of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, but radiating an unexpected warmth. At Crossroads, Maya met Mrs. Elena, a woman with the calm eyes of someone who had seen too much pain and decided to dedicate her life to easing it. Mrs. Elena didn't ask a single question about the sidewalk, the hunger, or the near tragedy. She simply handed Maya a thick blanket, a hot cup of tea, and a bowl of thick, life-giving soup. "Eat, child," Mrs. Elena commanded, her voice like sandpaper but her touch like velvet. "You can't fight for your boy if you're a ghost. You need strength. Your journey starts now." That night, for the first time in weeks, Maya slept in a bed. The physical relief was nothing compared to the emotional breakthrough. She woke up sobbing, not from despair, but from the sudden jarring realization that she was not alone. The shame, the fear, the crushing isolation. It all began to crack and crumble. The shelter wasn't a place of failure. It was a staging ground for her second chance. She spent the next few days in a whirlwind. Ricardo, who was working a double shift at a site in Warwick, called her every few hours, giving her updates on Leo, who was stable but still weak. Maya was forced to confront her past. She revealed the truth. She had fled an abusive partner in Boston months ago, moving to Providence to start fresh, scared to file for assistance for fear he would track her through the system. One afternoon, sitting alone in the quiet common room, Maya picked up a tattered magazine. Inside, she saw an article about a woman who had gone from homelessness to starting her own catering business in Newport. The woman's eyes in the photo, though smiling, held a familiar fire, a residual look of having stared down the abyss. Maya had a flashback. It wasn't to the bad times but to the good times. Her grandmother, back in their small town in rural Maine, teaching her to bake bread. The warmth of the oven, the smell of yeast, the comforting weight of the dough in her hands. Maya wasn't just a mother. She was a talented baker. That was her gift. That was the secret she'd forgotten in the fog of destitution. What if I'm not useless? What if I have something to offer? That night, Maya poured out her story to Mrs. Elena, not with shame but with a fierce new determination. I can bake, she declared. I can make bread better than any place in this city. I just need a start. Mrs. Elena didn't hesitate. There's a small kitchen here donated a few years ago. We rarely use it. You can have it for a day. Maya got to work. Ricardo showed up with 2 bags of flour, a small packet of yeast, and an old dented baking pan he'd bought with his lunch money. She worked all night. By morning, the shelter smelled like heaven. She made 3 simple loaves of rustic, crusty bread. They were perfect. The first slice she gave to Ricardo, the man who saved her son. The second she gave to Mrs. Elena. The third she decided to sell. She set up a small folding table outside the shelter gates, not begging but selling. A young woman, a graduate student from Brown University, stopped to try a sample. Her eyes widened. She bought the whole loaf. This is amazing, the student said. Do you have a card? I'm having a party next week. I'll buy 5 more. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A flicker of hope. A transformation had begun. The woman who begged was now the woman who baked. Just as Maya was packing up her folding table, filled with the warmth of a few dollars earned with dignity, an expensive black car pulled up to the curb. The driver's side window rolled down. It was the architect. The man with the gold watch. He didn't look impatient or contemptuous this time. He looked haunted. He didn't ask about the bread. He didn't even acknowledge the folding table. Maya, he said, his voice low and choked. He knew her name. How? I saw what happened to your son. I saw what I did. I saw how I judged you. He paused, taking a shaky breath. My name is Arthur. I've been tracking you through the hospital and the social services since Tuesday. I need to tell you something. That day, you reminded me of someone I lost a long time ago. A woman who was also desperate on a different street in a different city. My sister. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't full of cash. It was a single folded piece of thick, expensive cardstock. He held it out to her, his hand trembling. Please take this. It's not a donation. It's a key to a small empty retail space I own, just off Federal Hill. The rent is paid for 6 months. I also set up a trust account for a year's supply of formula for Leo. Let me help you start your bakery. Not out of pity, but as a debt. A debt to my past. Maya was stunned, tears blurring her vision. She took the card. It was a key to a new life, a new beginning. She looked at him, searching for the contempt, but found only raw, aching sincerity. Why? She whispered, her voice raw. Arthur stared at her, his hazel eyes, the same color as hers, filled with unshed tears. Because the day I saw your son go limp, I realized the one thing I'd spent my entire successful empty life running from. He confessed, the confession a punch of emotion. Leo is my son's age. I abandoned my wife and son 25 years ago in a desperate attempt to make it big in New York. I never went back. I never even saw my son as a baby. Until I saw Leo. And Maya, Leo, he's my nephew. The silence that followed Arthur's revelation was heavy enough to crush the very sidewalk they stood on. Leo is my nephew. Maya's heart stopped. She stared at Arthur, the successful, arrogant architect, and saw not a powerful stranger, but a man drowning in a lifetime of regret, a regret now painfully entwined with her own story. My mother, Maya finally breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Her maiden name was Helena. Arthur's eyes widened, recognizing the name of his estranged sister. Helena. She moved to Maine. She told me I had a brother, that she named him after Leo, Maya finished, the realization washing over her in a freezing wave. My husband's name was Leo, your sister's son. He died in an accident last year. A car crash. He was a good man, Arthur. He never knew he had an uncle who was this successful. The tragedy was now complete, a full circle of pain and redemption. Arthur hadn't just ignored a beggar. He had ignored the living, breathing legacy of the family he had abandoned. His sister's son, his nephew, had passed away, leaving behind a wife and son now forced to beg for survival in his own city. Just blocks from his luxury apartment, Arthur broke down. The architect of the tall buildings, the man of the gold watch and tailored suit, stood sobbing on the curb, his successful facade utterly shattered. He wasn't crying for the money or the shame. He was crying for the wasted years, for the sister he never reconciled with, for the nephew he never met, and for the fear he felt when he saw his own great-nephew almost die because of his own callous indifference. Maya, however, didn't cry then. Her tears had been spent on the pavement. Now a strange, fierce strength replaced the exhaustion. She stepped forward and did the unthinkable. She hugged him. She hugged the man who had judged her, who had been an enemy, because he was no longer a stranger. He was family. He was a broken part of her beloved Leo's past, and he was her new beginning. The contempt? Arthur choked out, holding her tight. The contempt was for myself, Maya. I saw my sister's pain in your eyes, and I hated it because it reminded me of what I did to my own family. 2 weeks later, Leo was home, healthy, chubby-cheeked, and sleeping soundly in a proper crib in a small apartment above the retail space Arthur had given them. The space wasn't an empty shell anymore. It was alive with the promise of flour, yeast, and warmth. Maya didn't take a dime from Arthur directly. She accepted the apartment and the business opportunity, the chance for a fresh start with dignity. She used a small loan secured by Arthur to buy a commercial oven and the necessary supplies. Her bakery was simply called Helena's Hearth, a tribute to his sister, her mother-in-law, and the healing fire of family. She didn't just sell bread, she sold hope. Word spread through the tight-knit community on Federal Hill. The Brown student was her first loyal customer. Ricardo, the construction worker, stopped by every morning for a fresh sourdough loaf, always leaving a generous, discreet tip. Arthur became a quiet presence in her life. He was the one who designed the beautiful, rustic wooden sign for the storefront. He never flaunted his money. He provided quiet, consistent support. He was learning day by day what it meant to be a family, not a banker. He had transformed from the cold architect into a healing uncle. And Maya? She had changed from the woman begging on the street to the proud owner, the artisan, the provider. Her eyes, once filled with shame, now held the fierce, confident fire of a woman who had fought for her son. And one morning, just as the sun was rising over Providence, Maya was pulling her first batch of cinnamon rolls from the oven. The smell, rich, sweet, and utterly comforting, drifted out into the still sleepy city. Leo, sitting happily in his high chair, watched her, his hazel eyes wide and bright. He reached out his small hand, not begging, but asking for a piece of the sweet, warm bread. Maya gently broke off a small, soft crumb and placed it on his tongue. He giggled, a pure, joyous sound that was better than any symphony. She looked at her son, then around her bustling, flour-dusted kitchen. She thought back to the cold pavement, the crumpled $10 bill, and the moment she almost made the wrong choice. And she knew, it was never about the money. It was always about the love. That love, her love for Leo, was the powerful, terrifying force that had driven her to the edge, but it was also the undeniable, beautiful force that had brought her back, surrounded by the healing presence of a family she never knew she had. So, the next time you see a desperate plea on the street, remember Maya. Remember that the story you see on the surface is rarely the whole truth. Sometimes that simple act of compassion, that single moment of kindness, is the only thing standing between a family and absolute ruin. You might not just be saving a life. You might be writing the first chapter of a story you'll never forget.